If you look at Raphael's The School of Athens, you can tell who the center of Western philosophy is. In the very center are Plato and Aristotle. To the left, you see Socrates talking amongst people. In front of Socrates, there is Heraclitus, and to the left of Heraclitus is Pythagoras. But there is a man peeking from behind Pythagoras, writing something down. This is Anaximander. Anaximander may not have much presence in the painting, but the 20th century philosopher of science, Karl Popper, said Anaximander was the first real scientist. He went on to say Anaximander and Einstein share the same scientific method. Why did he say this? We'll take a look at that today. Western philosophy began in the city of Miletus, an ancient Greek city located in Ionia. There were three representative philosophers in Miletus. They were Thales, Thales' student Anaximander, and Anaximander's student Anaximenes. They belonged to the Milesian school. Thales claimed that everything is made of water. With our modern lens of science, this seems like nonsense. But the underlying concept behind this idea is not nonsense at all. The thought underlying this is the idea that even the complicated nature is made up of something simpler and more fundamental. In short, Thales was a reductionist. But Anaximander thought there was something wrong with Thales' idea. The problem is this. Ancient Greeks thought there were four elements that make up everything in nature: earth, water, air, and fire. Each of these four elements had properties of being cold, hot, dry, or wet. Earth is cold and dry, water is cold and wet, fire is hot and dry, and air is hot and wet. But if everything is made of water, as Thales said, it's possible to explain how cold or wet things exist, but it's impossible to explain how hot or dry things came to be. The same problem occurs if everything is made of fire. In that case, we can explain how hot or dry things exist, but we cannot explain how cold or wet things came to be. So, Anaximander came up with a bold solution of his own. He thought that the fundamental substance which makes up the universe should not have any specific properties of being hot, cold, dry, or wet. He calls this Apeiron. In Greek, the prefix a means without, and paris means end or limit. So Apeiron is something that is unlimited or indefinite. It cannot be defined or observed. Anaximander believed that only Apeiron could explain how the four elements with different properties can exist. In physics today, the source of all matter is particles such as quarks or waves. These do not have properties of being hot, cold, dry, or wet. In a way, Anaximander's argument that the fundamental principle or elements should not have any specific property seems quite sophisticated even today. Anaximander's bold theory had truth in it. Anaximander's bold thinking didn't stop there. Remember that Thales thought that everything is made of water? He also thought that the earth is floating on water, and the reason earthquakes occur is the tides caused by the water. But Anaximander had a different idea. This is the world map of Anaximander. We have Europe at the top, Asia on the right, and Libya on the bottom. Anaximander thought that the earth is a cylinder floating in infinite space. What was the logic behind this? If we suppose that the earth is floating in water like Thales did, the water has to be on top of something else, which has to be on top of something else, which has to be on top of something else, and so on. Something at the very bottom has to be floating in space. So it's simpler to just suppose that the earth is floating in space. In the 21st century, we take it for granted that the earth is floating in space, but it wouldn't have been easy to envision for ancient Greeks more than 2,500 years ago. Once again, Anaximander's bold theory had truth in it. 2,500 years after Anaximander, Albert Einstein came up with a bold hypothesis of his own. Gravity bends light. In the 19th century, Einstein conducted a thought experiment. Imagine there is a transparent elevator. If a light beam enters through the left side of the elevator at the height of 2 meters from the floor, it would move in a straight line and exit through the right side at the same height of 2 meters. But if the elevator moves up while the light beam is entering, it would exit at a height lower than what it entered, maybe 1 meter. If we were watching from outside the elevator, the light would appear to move in a straight line. But to someone inside the elevator, the light would appear to move in a curved path. What is the difference? We on the outside feel no force, but the person in the elevator is affected by the gravity inside the elevator as it moves up. That is how Einstein predicted that gravity bends light. Later, in 1919, when a solar eclipse occurred in Africa, Arthur Eddington observed that the path of starlight does bend due to the gravity of the sun. Gravity did indeed bend light. Unlike scientists who believe that science develops gradually by observing individual facts and generalizing them, Popper believed that science takes leaps. A great scientific discovery occurs when a scientist comes up with a bold hypothesis and it is refuted. Then another scientist comes up with another hypothesis and it is refuted, until there is a hypothesis that can no longer be refuted. Then the hypothesis is accepted as a scientific theory. Like this, science takes leaps through bold hypotheses. According to Popper, Einstein and Anaximander had the same methodology. Einstein came to the conclusion that light is bent by gravity through a thought experiment, and Anaximander came to the conclusion that the source of all things should be empty of properties through the process of inference, that if the fundamental element has a certain property, it would be impossible to explain the existence of opposing properties. He came to the conclusion that the Earth is floating in space, because if the Earth is on top of something else, there will be an infinite regression. That is why Popper calls Anaximander the first scientist who presented a bold scientific hypothesis. Let's wrap up. First, Anaximander thought that everything is made of Apeiron. Apeiron means that which is indefinite. Second, Anaximander came up with bold theories through reasoning. These theories are that the fundamental principles of all things should not have a specific property, and that the Earth should be floating in space. Third, in this sense, Anaximander wasn't a peeping Tom who was hiding behind Pythagoras, but a scientist who boldly did philosophy.